They say the lake is older than anyone alive. But that's a lie. The water didn't used to be there. It was poured over something. Something human. In 1958, the government flooded an entire village to build a reservoir. They said it was uninhabited. They lied. Now, every 27 years, people vanish near its shores. Some say it's coincidence. Others whisper that the village, and its dead, wake up. This summer, for the first time in almost 3 decades, the lake's waterline is dropping, exposing rooftops that should have stayed buried. And what's coming up with them isn't human. Derek Connolly had been on the road for 11 hours when he first saw the water. It appeared suddenly through the windshield, an endless sheet of dull gray stretching between the tree-covered hills. Lake Dunsmore. It wasn't beautiful like the pictures online had suggested. It was still, too still, like someone had laid a slab of metal between the mountains. He pulled his old Subaru off at a scenic overlook, mostly to stretch his legs, partly to take in the view. But the view was nothing to write home about. No boats, no campers, no kids splashing on the shore. Just one wide, lonely reservoir in the heart of the Appalachians. His camera sat on the passenger seat, along with the recorder he'd been talking into for most of the drive. Entry 1, he said, pressing record. July 1st, 2024. This is Derek Connolly, and I'm officially in Dunsmore County. I'm here to investigate the rumors surrounding Lake Dunsmore, a man-made reservoir built in 1958 after the government flooded a small settlement in this valley. Official reports say the town was evacuated without incident. Local legends tell a different story. He paused, letting the hum of cicadas fill the silence. They call it the Drowned Village. And every 27 years, without fail, people go missing around this lake. I've mapped them: 1958, 1985, 2012. Clusters of disappearances, campers, locals, drifters. The last one was a couple hiking the Western Trail. Their bodies were never found. No suspects. No explanations. He lowered the recorder, staring out at the water. Some people think it's a curse, he said softly. Some say it's just coincidence. But one old article I found said the villagers never left at all. The town of Dunsmore wasn't much to look at. A single gas station. A diner with a flickering neon sign that read Debbie's Place. A motel that could have doubled as a set for a 1970s slasher film. Derek stopped at the gas station for coffee and to ask for directions to the reservoir's access point. Inside, the air was heavy with motor oil and mildew. Behind the counter, an old man in overalls looked him over with pale, watery eyes. Out-of-towner, the man said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Derek said with a polite smile. Doing some research on the lake. You lived here long. All my life, the man said, ringing up a pack of cigarettes for someone in line. Then you might know about the village that used to be here. The old man froze mid-scan. He set the cigarettes down and leaned across the counter. Best not to go poking around in that business, son. They don't like it when people stir up the past. Derek blinked. The man's lips twitched. The ones down there. That night, Derek checked into the Lakeview Motel, a name that was more hopeful than accurate. The view from his room was a patch of overgrown grass and a rusting ice machine. He set up his laptop and mic, recording his first impressions. Locals are skittish, he said, trying to keep his tone professional. Either they don't know much about the village, or they don't want to talk about it. Met one old-timer who warned me not to stir up the past. He chuckled humorlessly. Classic small-town creep factor. He planned to start with simple visuals, drone shots of the lake, maybe some audio recordings for atmospheric sound. Just enough to hook his podcast audience. But as he stared out at the darkened waterline, something about it made him uneasy. It wasn't just the emptiness. It was how wrong it felt. The next evening, just before sunset, Derek rented a small rowboat from the only marina still open. The kid who handed him the keys wouldn't meet his eye. Stay away from the church, the kid mumbled. Derek frowned. The what? But the boy had already walked off. By the time he was halfway across the lake, the sun was dipping low, turning the water copper. Derek set up his drone and let it lift off with a high-pitched whir. From the air, Lake Dunsmore looked even stranger. A perfect oval carved into the valley, with no natural curves or inlets. He guided the drone toward the center of the lake and froze. Something was jutting out of the water about 100 yards ahead. At first, he thought it was a tree. But as the drone got closer, the shape became clearer. A steeple. It rose from the water like an accusing finger, blackened with age, its cross bent sideways. Derek's pulse quickened. The boy's words came back to him. Stay away from the church. He maneuvered the drone lower, capturing footage of the submerged structure beneath the surface. But as he scanned the murky depths, something else caught his eye. Movement. For a brief moment, he saw shapes, long, pale shapes, drifting along the lake floor. At first, he thought they were fish, but they moved wrong. Too steady, like people walking. Back at the motel, Derek replayed the footage over and over, pausing, zooming, enhancing. It wasn't clear, distorted by silt and shadows, but he swore he saw arms, legs, faces. He turned up the audio, hoping for anything, and that's when he heard it. A faint, muffled voice, so soft he almost thought he imagined it. Derek, his breath hitched. No one at the marina knew his name. No one in town knew his name. He stared at the laptop screen, replaying that second again and again. There it was. A woman's voice. Underwater. Whispering. Derek. And then, just as suddenly, the audio cut out. The next morning, Derek woke with the taste of lake water in his mouth. He sat up too fast, heart hammering, and nearly laughed at himself. It was just a dream. Just a dream. But when he swung his legs off the bed, his socks landed in a cold puddle. He blinked down at the floor. A slick, dark circle of water stained the cheap carpet beside his bed. He crouched, touching it with his fingertips. It was real and cold. His gaze swept the room. The sink was dry. The AC was off. The bathroom tiles were bone dry. There was no reason for this much water to be pooling in the middle of the floor. And then he noticed the smell. Lake water. By 9 a.m., Derek was sitting across from Loretta Dawson at the corner booth of Debbie's Place. She was the oldest person in town by anyone's guess. All soft, parchment-thin skin and wiry white hair. Loretta had been in Dunsmore before the reservoir swallowed the valley, and she had reluctantly agreed to talk after Derek flashed his podcast credentials. I remember the day they told us we had to leave, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. July 13th, 1958. They said the dam project was for the greater good. Said they'd relocate us. Most of us left. But not everyone. Not everyone. Derek pressed, her cloudy blue eyes fixed on him. Some of them refused. Said the government had no right to steal their homes. And some believed that preacher. You've heard of him, I take it. The preacher? She nodded grimly. Reverend Caraway. He told them the flood wasn't a project. It was divine judgment. That if they stayed, they'd be spared. Derek felt a chill ripple up his arms. And did they stay? Her spoon clattered against the cup. They did. Whole families. Said they'd wait for God to save them. But he didn't. The water came anyway. And they were still in their homes when it did. Derek tried to keep his voice even. The official record says the evacuation was complete. No casualties. Her laugh was dry and humorless. Of course it does. You think the government wanted to admit they drowned an entire congregation. So they lied. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Oh, they lied. They buried them. And now, her voice lowered to a whisper. Now they won't stay buried. That night, Derek dug through the county archive, a dusty basement below City Hall that smelled of paper and mold. He found old photographs of the drowned town, labeled Dunsmore Village, pre-1958. At first glance, they looked like any other black and white snapshots. Kids playing near a churchyard, a farmer leaning against a fence. But when Derek zoomed in, his stomach dropped. In the background of several photos were figures with strangely elongated faces. Their eyes were dark smudges, their mouths too wide. At first, he thought it was a photographic error. But the more he looked, the more intentional it felt. One photo in particular made his blood run cold. The entire congregation standing outside the church. Every one of them staring directly into the camera, unblinking. That night, Derek dreamed. He was walking through a village at dusk. The houses sagged under the weight of decades of water. Streets were coated in algae and mud. A distant bell tolled. When he turned toward the sound, he saw the church, the same steeple from the drone footage, whole and untouched. And then came the whispers, muffled at first, like a choir under the floorboards. He waded closer, his feet sinking into the mud. The doors swung open on their own. Inside, pews were lined with people. Men, women, children, all of them pale, bloated, their faces warped by drowning. Their lips moved in unison, but the sound was garbled, like it was still underwater. In the center stood a tall, thin figure in a preacher's collar. "Derek," it said, voice like water filling a lung. He woke up gasping, coughing, like he'd inhaled a gallon of the lake. His motel clock read 3:12 a.m. The puddle on the carpet was back. By morning, he'd convinced himself the dream was just his brain processing all the creepy things he'd heard. But when he stepped outside, his resolve cracked. On the windshield of his car, weighted by a stone, was a folded 1958 newspaper clipping. It was the front page, "Village evacuation complete." No casualties. But someone had scrawled across it in dripping, fresh black ink. "Liars. We're still here." By the third day, Derek realized the lake was changing. It started with the smell. The sweet, putrid stench of decay that clung to the air when the wind blew off the water. Then came the color. The once dull gray had shifted to a murky brown-green, as if something deep below had been stirred up. But the biggest change? The waterline. In the span of 48 hours, it had dropped by nearly 4 feet. From the motel's parking lot, Derek could see structures pushing through the surface like bones breaking through skin. The outlines of rooftops, warped fences, and a stone wall that curved into the woods. He recorded a voice note as he stared at the receding lake. Entry 3, July 3, 2024. The water level is falling fast. Locals say it's the worst drop in decades, but they won't say why. No one will talk. It's like they're scared of what's underneath. He stopped. The last word echoed in his head. Underneath. At noon, Derek drove back into town to find someone, anyone, willing to talk. He ended up at a rusted-out bait shop run by a grizzled man who introduced himself only as Rhett. Rhett smelled of whiskey and fish guts. His skin looked like leather left in the sun too long. "You're the podcaster," Rhett said, squinting. "Yeah, I heard you've been poking where you shouldn't. Looking for dead folks." Derek shifted uneasily. "I'm trying to document the history of the old village. Maybe clear up some of the myths." Rhett barked a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Ain't no myths. They're still there." Derek blinked. "You mean the graves?" "No." Rhett leaned across the counter, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp. "I mean them." Derek swallowed. "You've seen them?" Rhett nodded slowly. "Couple nights back? Right round 2 in the morning. Out by the western shore. They was walking. Right out of the water." Derek's skin crawled. "Walking. Like they never drowned. But they ain't right. Skin like paper. Eyes too dark. Didn't say nothing. Just stood there. Watching me. And you're sure they weren't?" "Don't finish that sentence," Rhett growled. "They weren't people. Least not anymore." That night, Derek decided to see for himself. The waterline had dropped enough that parts of the old town were walkable. He parked near the dam and trekked down the exposed shoreline, his flashlight sweeping over mud-crusted remnants of the past. Warped picket fences, the jagged frame of a swing set, the collapsed roof of a house. He paused at one house, still half submerged. Peering through a cracked window, his light fell on a room that had been frozen in time. Rusted bed frames, moss growing over faded wallpaper, and on the wall, children's drawings. They were crude but clear. A tall, thin figure with a black oval where its face should be, towering over a crowd of smaller people. Scrawled beneath in dripping, childlike letters, "The Preacher." A sudden splash echoed behind him. Derek spun, scanning the lake. Nothing. But the air felt heavier now. Thicker. He started recording. Entry 4. I'm standing on what used to be the heart of the village. I'm looking at children's drawings, depicting some kind of figure they called the Preacher. He stopped mid-sentence. On the far side of the exposed lakebed stood the church. Whole sections of its walls were still submerged, but the blackened steeple rose defiantly into the dark sky. And standing on its roof, motionless, unmistakable, was a figure. Derek froze. Even from this distance, he could tell it wasn't right. Too tall. Too thin. Its limbs too long for its body. Its head cocked at an unnatural angle. His light swept across it for only a moment, but in that moment, it turned toward him. He bolted. Back at the motel, Derek played back his footage with shaking hands. On the screen, the figure on the church roof stood perfectly still, until the last frame, where it seemed to tilt its head and smile. Except its mouth didn't move. The skin on its face did. 3 knocks. That's all it took to make Derek forget how to breathe. They weren't loud. They weren't frantic. They were deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. He sat frozen in the dark motel room, heart hammering so loud he could barely hear. His phone was on the nightstand, just inches away, but his hand wouldn't move. Another knock. This one softer, almost playful. He managed to choke out, "Who's there?" No answer. When he finally stood, legs trembling, and flicked the light back on, the puddle was back, bigger than before. By sunrise, Derek's nerves were shot. He knew he couldn't keep playing journalist. This wasn't just a story anymore. Something was watching him. Something wanted him at that lake. But he couldn't stop. Not now. He returned to the exposed shoreline that afternoon, armed with his recorder and a flashlight. The waterline had fallen even further overnight, revealing more of the drowned village. Entire rooftops and skeletal trees now jutted out of the muck. And the church, it stood taller than before, as if the lake itself had been bowing away from it. Derek felt his pulse quicken. He needed to get inside. The church doors were swollen with age, but after several shoves, they creaked open. The smell hit him first: mildew, rot, and something older, almost metallic. Inside, it was like stepping into a mausoleum. Pews sat chained together, the iron links rusted and fused to the wood. Chains. Derek frowned. Why would pews need chains? He stepped further inside, recording everything. Entry 5. I'm inside the church. The congregation area looks wrong. Pews are chained in place. I think he froze. There was writing on the walls. Dozens of passages from the Bible, carved into the wood with what looked like nails. And beneath them, scratched deep into the altar itself, were the words, "We will not drown. We will rise." A sound echoed from beneath the floorboards. A low, muffled chanting. Derek crouched, pressing his ear to the warped floor. It was faint, a rhythmic whispering, like prayers spoken underwater. His blood ran cold. They were still here. The water sloshed suddenly. Derek shot up, whipping his light toward the doorway. The waterline had risen around the church. Fast. Too fast. It now lapped at the entrance, swallowing the steps he'd just climbed. And then he heard it. Movement in the water. Heavy. Deliberate. Something enormous was circling the church. Derek bolted for the door, splashing into knee-deep water. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel it behind him. He scrambled up the newly exposed bank, panting and shaking, nearly collapsing when he reached solid ground. By the time he reached the motel, the sun was setting. His drone, which he'd left on the church steps, was gone. But something else was waiting. On his motel door, scrawled in dripping, black mud, were the words, "Don't let him wake." Derek shut himself in his room, locking the door twice. He recorded his shaking voice into the mic. Entry 6. There's something in that church. Something alive. I don't think it's human. Whatever this preacher is, it's not just a story. It's real. And it's waking up. He stopped the recording. From outside, carried on the night wind, came the faint toll of a bell. The same bell from his dream. By dawn, Derek had stopped pretending this was a story. It was a trap. He could feel it in his bones. He tried to leave, threw his gear into his Subaru, and sped down the one road out of Dunsmore. He didn't even look at the rear view, just kept his foot pressed to the gas, willing himself out of this nightmare. And then he saw it. A wall of dirt, trees, and debris blocking the road like a barricade. Fresh. A landslide. Derek stumbled out of the car, staring in disbelief. The smell of mud and lake water clung to the air. This wasn't natural. It was a warning. Back at the motel, Derek sat on the bed, recorder in hand. Entry 7. July 4th, 2024. I can't leave. The road's blocked. The waterline keeps dropping. It's like the lake's bleeding out. And now there are people. Or things. I don't know. I saw them last night. Dozens of them. Standing in a circle around the church. Waiting. His voice trembled. I think they're waiting for me. That night, he heard the voices. Not whispers this time. Prayers. A crowd of them, murmuring outside his room in unison. Derek crept to the window, heart pounding, and froze. The motel parking lot was full. Dozens of pale villagers stood in the dirt, unmoving. Men, women, children, their clothes old-fashioned, waterlogged, their skin gray and bloated. Every single one of them staring at his door. Then they parted, and he stepped forward. The preacher. Even from a distance, Derek could tell this wasn't a man. Not anymore. He was tall, impossibly tall, his frame stretched like a marionette. His skin was split and swollen, waterlogged to the point of bursting. His collar clung tight to his throat, the last remnant of his old life. And his eyes, two black pits that swallowed the light. Derek stumbled back, clutching his recorder like a talisman. The preacher lifted one skeletal hand and pointed at him. "Come," he rasped. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. The next minutes blurred. Derek didn't remember opening the door, didn't remember stepping outside. But suddenly he was there, standing barefoot in the cold dirt, surrounded by the drowned congregation. The preacher loomed above him. "You are one of us now," the thing whispered, its voice like rushing water filling his lungs. A wet, bony hand rested on Derek's shoulder. And just like that, he couldn't move. The chanting grew louder. The villagers closed in, pressing against him, their rotten faces blank with worship. And then, with the weight of 1,000 gallons of water, the world went black. When the motel owner checked the room 3 days later, Derek was gone. His recorder sat on the bed. Weeks later, a young podcaster named Angela stopped at the motel, following up on a rumor about an abandoned car. She found Derek's recorder, hit play, and listened. His last entry was barely a whisper, but she could make out the words, "The lake, it's breathing. It wants more." She stopped the tape. And then it happened. Water dripped from the recorder onto her hand. The last second of the audio was a chorus of voices, Derek's among them, chanting in perfect unison, praying. Final line. "They say the village sleeps beneath the lake. They were wrong. It's awake." What do you think Derek saw that night? Was it really the preacher, or something older? And why do you think the lake wakes every 27 years? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more real horror and urban legends from Room 13A.